The night seems denser when the truth tries to pierce the silence, and it is precisely at that moment that something inside you contracts, as if recognizing an ancient call that has always been there, waiting to be heard. It's as if someone strikes the surface of your inner world, and for a brief second, everything you believed you controlled shifts. There is an impact that doesn't warn, that doesn't ask permission, that simply erupts, and it is this impact that now begins to open the path you may have feared to travel. Carl Jung said that the human psyche reacts to shocks as if they were portals, and it's curious to realize that sometimes what hurts us most is precisely what summons us most. You feel this call in your body, in your skin, in the memory that insists on returning even when you try to push it away. And it is precisely there that the first question arises: why you? Unease comes with an almost savage force when we think about childhood, especially when it happened in an environment where love was irregular, unstable, or deceptive. You read these words and perhaps feel an echo of something you tried to bury. It's not easy to revisit such intimate territory, but the truth is that nothing begins on the outside. Everything is born in the invisible. Jung reminded us that the unconscious doesn't waste experiences, and perhaps that's the profound reason why so many sensitive people seem to have emerged from families that, instead of welcoming, hurt them. It's uncomfortable to admit this, but there's a secret geometry in the way life shapes us, and often the center of this design is precisely friction. You wonder if it could have been different, and perhaps this question has accompanied you since very early on. However, it's worth facing another provocation. What if the initial pain wasn't a mistake? What if it was the entrance to the territory where your consciousness would learn to breathe? The idea seems strange at first glance, perhaps even unfair. But observe what happens when someone grows up amidst total harmony. There is comfort, there is gentleness, there is coziness. But there is also an absence of questioning. A world without cracks hardly instigates anyone to seek the source of light. Jung spoke about how suffering functions as fuel for individuation, not because pain itself is sacred, but because it forces the psyche to reorganize itself. It demands that you look within yourself for an axis that you did not receive from the outside. And it is at this point that everything becomes truly intriguing. A dysfunctional family does not provide maps. It does not provide compasses. It does not provide guarantees. It provides enigmas. And you, even without realizing it, have spent years trying to decipher these enigmas while acquiring a rare ability, that of observing chaos without dissolving completely into it. There's something profoundly symbolic about you being thrown into an environment where love always seemed like an incomplete equation. The inner world develops differently when you grow up trying to understand why something that should nurture also hurts. It's a question that spans phases, generations, choices, and almost always returns in different guises. But there's a silent discovery that many make too late. This confusion about love is, paradoxically, the gateway to a type of awareness that almost no one spontaneously seeks. Jung stated that the shadow is the true laboratory of the spirit, and perhaps your childhood was marked precisely by the summons to this laboratory. Not because you were destined for suffering, but because your sensitivity demanded deep ground to sprout. It's possible you've tried to escape this origin for years, believing that distance would be enough for healing. But it's only when we look inward without averting our gaze that we recognize something essential. The experiences we most try to reject are often the ones that sustain our strength. Think of the symbol of the grain of sand that invades the inside of an oyster. The oyster, unable to expel it, doesn't surrender to despair. It transforms it. Layer after layer, it covers the pain until the pain becomes form, until the form becomes brilliance. Jung would use this metaphor to illustrate psychic alchemy, a process in which raw suffering is converted into refined knowledge. You are the oyster and also the artisan of this brilliance. Your inner layers, those you built to survive, were the beginning of your wisdom, even if you didn't realize it at the time. There's an important detail that few dare to face. Growing up in a dysfunctional family requires you to develop senses that others will never need to develop. It's almost as if you learned to feel before you understood, as if you acquired an emotional radar that detects nuances that go unnoticed by others. This hypersensitivity, which often seemed like a burden, is also a gateway to a broader perception of reality. Jung said that the unconscious is a living territory, and sensitive people tend to walk through it too early, sometimes even before they have the words to describe what they feel. Perhaps you recognize this feeling of having perceived the absurdity before you could name it. Perhaps you felt the disarray of the adults around you as one feels the wind changing direction. This ability is not common, and it is precisely in it that the seed of awakening resides. The provocative question returns: would you be who you are without the initial friction? This question doesn't ask for submission to facts or romanticization of pain. It asks for perspective. Jung warned that we shouldn't seek the light by denying the shadow, because denying the shadow is denying the whole. Perhaps your story has been marked by rejections, harsh silences, impossible expectations, or patterns that always seem to repeat themselves like a hidden ritual. And yet within this labyrinth you walked. You sought exits that didn't exist. You imagined futures that contradicted the atmosphere of the house where you grew up. And that in itself is already a gesture of psychic courage. Few realize how much surviving this type of environment requires a silent, almost invisible strength. Jung stated that the soul grows in a spiral, and perhaps your spiral began earlier, strained by forces you didn't understand, but which shaped your perception of the world. This is where one of the most delicate points arises: the confusion about love. A toxic family doesn't just hurt, it muddles. It creates a labyrinth where affection and fear mix, where affection and control become almost indistinguishable. And when love becomes an enigma, the search for it transforms into a journey. Jung would say that you began your archetypal journey ahead of time, driven by the need to find a love that wasn't ambiguous, that didn't hurt, that didn't manipulate. And it is precisely this search that pushes consciousness into deeper territories. While so many go through life without questioning the meaning of love, you needed to do so to survive. This is a milestone, even if it was born from pain. Now, without you realizing it, something begins to stir within the text and within you. There's a subtle vibration, as if a door is about to open. You feel it even without knowing how to name it. It's the harbinger that the journey that began in childhood didn't end there. There are questions that haven't yet been explored. There are layers that haven't yet been revealed. There are inner zones that you've avoided for years, but which now begin to call your name with an almost unsettling precision. And it is on this threshold, at this exact point between what you know and what you still fear to discover, that the first part comes to an end. But the end here is not a closure. It's a summons. Because something bigger is approaching, and you already sense that in the next part, the truths that were hidden will begin to emerge with even greater intensity. And the question that echoes now, silent and inevitable, is this: are you prepared to enter the heart of the shadow where the true meaning of love will finally be revealed? There's a strange moment when everyday life seems to open up like a crack. You're on a crowded bus watching people fiddling with their phones, arguing with the driver, or trying to balance shopping bags, and suddenly something shifts inside you. It's such a subtle feeling that no one around would notice, but you do. A thought arises without warning. Why do I see everything so differently? This question doesn't appear out of nowhere. It springs from the experience of someone who, from a very young age, learned to distrust appearances. Carl Jung said that awakened consciousness always begins with a sense of strangeness, as if something within us begins to perceive that the external world and the internal world don't tell the same story. And perhaps the first place where this discrepancy arose was precisely within your own family. Imagine a seemingly banal scene. You, still a child, sitting at the dinner table. The dishes are simple, the conversation is short, perhaps even cold. There's something in the air that no one names, but you feel it as if it were a silent electric current. You look at the faces of the adults around you and realize that their words don't match the mood. They say everything is fine, but their eyes tell a different story. It is in this small fracture between what is said and what is felt that your consciousness begins to form. Jung insisted that the child's psyche is extremely sensitive to invisible signals, and so, while other children simply absorb the environment without questioning, you begin to wonder why love tastes bitter. This questioning, which might seem too premature, is actually the first glimpse of what will later become your strength. What differentiates those who grow up in difficult environments is not only the pain they suffer, but the need to interpret the world without being able to trust it. Think of everyday situations. An adult who gives up on a relationship upon noticing the first signs of manipulation. Someone who immediately identifies disguised hostility in a work environment, a sense of alert that arises when sensing that something is wrong with a seemingly peaceful friendship. Often you react before others, not because you are suspicious, but because you recognize patterns you learned very early on. It's an almost instinctive reading, as if the shadow of the past guides your eyes without you asking. Jung would say that this is the unconscious acting in its purest state, reminding you of what you once needed to learn to survive. There are also unexpected moments, small internal shifts that occur when you least expect them. Perhaps you're laughing with friends, having coffee on an ordinary afternoon, when suddenly you feel a pang in your heart, an inexplicable intuition that something familiar is about to repeat itself. There's no apparent reason, no concrete evidence, but you recognize the feeling with the precision of someone who has faced it before. This kind of perception doesn't arise from lightness, it arises from friction. It arises from the fact that, unlike many, you couldn't simply accept the model of love you received. It was so flawed, so contradictory, so full of gaps, that repeating the pattern would be like trying to walk on a broken bridge. Something in you refused. This moment of refusal is more important than it seems. It's when you tell yourself, even without having the words at the time, this is not love. This silent declaration is the spark that ignites the awakening. Jung described this process as a break with ancestral programming, an internal gesture that redefines what the soul is willing to accept. And it's fascinating to realize how this break repeats itself throughout life. Whenever you approach situations that remind you of the past, while many people move forward repeating what they learned, you stop, you observe, you feel the resistance. And even when you try to act like everyone else, something deep inside you insists that this is not the way. Everyday life offers countless examples of this tension. Perhaps you've experienced receiving a loving message from someone, and instead of feeling immediate joy, you felt doubt. Not because the person was dishonest, but because your body hasn't learned to trust affection immediately. Or perhaps you find yourself overly cautious, trying to anticipate problems before they happen, as if you were still trying to avoid disasters that seemed imminent in childhood. Jung stated that the unconscious doesn't forget, it merely reorganizes itself. And in your case, it reorganized itself to protect you, to help you survive, to allow you to develop roots capable of withstanding profound shocks. These roots, however painful they may be, are also the source of the depth that sets you apart. While those who had easy childhoods walk through the world with the carefree attitude of those who never had to face inner storms, you move with an expanded awareness. You perceive nuances of behavior, small variations in tone of voice, emotional subtleties that others don't even register. It's not a gift, it's survival transformed into perception. It's living proof that your psyche grew beyond expectations precisely because the ground that sustained it was unstable. Jung would say that it is these fissures that allow the light to enter, but he also reminded us that, for some, the light enters first as pain. There is also the universal experience of trying to love again. Perhaps you grew close to someone who seemed to offer security, but as the relationship progressed, something inside began to unsettle. Affection triggered an old fear, a gentle gesture awakened confused memories, and you found yourself torn between accepting the affection or fleeing from it. This doesn't mean you are incapable of love. It means your body associates love with vigilance, care with tension, closeness with risk. And recognizing this is already part of the healing process. Jung stated that consciousness expands when we are able to observe our own reactions without drowning in them, and perhaps you are precisely at that point, seeing yourself clearly for the first time. The unexpected part of this whole story is realizing that your discomfort with love, your difficulty trusting, your heightened perception of danger are not symptoms of weakness. They are signs of depth. They are marks of someone who has traversed inner regions that many will never visit. And although this began as an attempt to survive, today it has become a rare ability to understand the human essence. The stark truth is that you know darkness because you have lived in it. You know that people can be driven by ego, fear, envy, helplessness. And knowing this, you also know how to identify true brilliance when it appears. Something within you is able to distinguish sincere affection from false affection with instinctive precision. Not because you were born this way, but because you had to learn. Now, as the text progresses and you take a deeper breath, something curious is happening. A deeper layer begins to reveal itself, as if something long hidden is beginning to stir. A slight, almost imperceptible restlessness, but one that you recognize as a harbinger of change. Jung said that the unconscious pushes our attention when it is ready to reveal something new, something we failed to see because it was too big or too painful to face. And perhaps that is exactly what is emerging now. Because there is a truth that has not yet been told. A truth that is not found on the surface of suffering but at its roots. A truth that explains not only your past, but the way you love, fear, approach, and distance yourself. And this truth, which begins to pulsate between the lines, will be the focus of the next part. The moment when the shadow ceases to be merely a backdrop and becomes a character. The moment when you finally see that what hurt you the most was also what prepared you the most. And the serious and unavoidable question that now arises is this: are you ready to discover what the shadow has always been trying to tell you about who you really are? There comes a moment when lucidity ceases to be a relief and becomes an almost unbearable burden. You realize this when you feel you can no longer go back, when you notice that the illusions that once sustained your childhood have dissolved like mist in the sun. There are no more fantasies saving your perception. There are no internal censures trying to soften the impact of reality. You look at your history and see, with almost painful clarity, that you did not receive what you deserved. Carl Jung said that consciousness matures as it ceases to confuse desire with truth, and perhaps that was your first great step, realizing that what you called love for so long was not love. It was absence, confusion, an automatic repetition of wounds that came from long before you. And this revelation, however bitter it may have been, opened doors that will never close. It is precisely at this point that an inner force begins to stir. It is not explosive force, not anger or resentment. It is something more silent, almost mineral, as if the deep root you have cultivated begins to vibrate. Something within you intuits that seeing the world without illusions is not a punishment, but a rare ability. While many take refuge in easy explanations, you look directly at what is difficult to face, and the most surprising thing is that this clarity has not hardened you. On the contrary, it has broadened your sensitivity. Jung stated that true wisdom arises from the union between pain and consciousness, and perhaps it is this union that is now expanding within you, breaking every limit that seemed definitive. But here comes the first unexpected pause. Have you truly grasped the depth of what you faced? Or is there still something you're afraid to admit? When you look at your family with this newfound clarity, something unsettling is revealed. They weren't just the agents of your suffering. They were, before that, bearers of a pain they also didn't understand. Their anger had roots older than your memories. Their fear was generated in other times, in other homes, in other silences you never witnessed, but which somehow reached you. Jung said that we carry the history of those who came before, that our psyche is traversed by ancestral rivers that flow even when we don't know how to name them. Perhaps that's what you feel now. The invisible inheritance of wounds passed down from generation to generation, not out of malice, but out of a lack of awareness. And it's shocking to realize that what has reached you didn't begin with you. Can you imagine how many lives have been marked by this chain of repetition? How many people tried to love without knowing how to love? How many fathers yelled because they were taught to fear silence? How many mothers manipulated because they never learned to trust? It's uncomfortable to acknowledge this, almost unfair but essential. Because when you accept that your family members were wounded, not just flawed, but wounded, something in the narrative changes. Not to numb the pain, not to excuse them, but to reorganize your understanding. You cease to be merely the victim of the story and become the breaking point, the place where the chain finally snaps. Jung would say that this moment is the beginning of individuation, the instant when you stop being an automatic continuation of your own family and become the author of your own psyche. And here another question arises that breaks the silence. Have you ever realized the magnitude of the responsibility you carried without knowing it? The idea of having been chosen might seem overwhelming, almost arrogant, but the meaning here is different. It's not about superiority, but about ability. You were the one who looked at the pattern and said no. You were the one who stopped, who questioned, who realized that repeating history would mean perpetuating a pain that had already spanned too many generations. And this refusal, this small internal rupture, is one of the most powerful actions a human being can take. Jung said that the courageous soul is the one that accepts facing what the entire lineage avoided, and that's precisely what you did, even without being aware of it at the time. Have you ever wondered why it was you and not another family member? Once you recognized the pattern and distanced yourself from it, a new understanding began to emerge. You began to realize that your family members, however toxic they may have been, were also your unwitting teachers. Dark teachers, teachers of tortuous paths, teachers who taught through shock, scarcity, or abandonment, but teachers nonetheless. They showed you, viscerally, what happens when someone lives without awareness. They showed you the result of ignoring one's own shadow, and in doing so, they offered you something they didn't offer themselves, the opportunity to choose a different path. Jung said that the soul only awakens in the face of the impossible, and perhaps your family was precisely that, the impossible that forces consciousness to be born. It is at this point that a strange sensation begins to stir within you, as if something is about to emerge from very deep regions. It is not fear, it is not pain, it is recognition. The realization that you not only survived but also transformed what you received. That, while many around you remained trapped by their own ghosts, you found internal ways to breathe, grow, and see beyond what was given to you. This awareness brings with it a kind of luminous silence, as if someone were turning on a dim light in a room that had always been dark. But here's another necessary turning point. Do you understand how far you've already walked in the dark without abandoning yourself? What comes next is a subtle but profound turning point. You begin to realize that the cycle isn't broken simply by refusal. It's broken by active choice. It's not enough to say, I won't be like them. You need to discover who you are beyond the norm. You need to create new gestures, new ways of loving, new ways of existing that have no precedent in your family history. Jung said that breaking with psychic inheritance requires creativity, because the unconscious only transforms when we create something that didn't exist before. And perhaps that's what you're about to do. Create, not as an escape, but as an affirmation. And now, as something dawns on you, a second shock arises. You realize that the true rupture is not against your family, but against the destiny they inherited. And here's the final question, the one that can't be answered quickly. Are you ready to discover what exists within you that doesn't belong to any pain, any past, or any story that came before? Because it is precisely this territory, new, untouched, surprising, that will begin to reveal itself in the next part. The first sensation that washes over you when you realize that nothing in your life has been automatic is a mixture of vertigo and power. It's as if the ground opens up for a moment, revealing that all the structures that supported your identity were made of choices. Choices you had to make while others simply followed scripts. Carl Jung said that consciousness is born when the individual separates from the collective flow, and perhaps this is the image that best describes what happened to you. While so many around you merely reproduced inherited behaviors, you discovered that you needed to decide everything: how to love, how to trust, how to protect yourself, how to exist. Nothing was handed to you ready-made. Nothing came packaged in certainties. And it is precisely this absence that has transformed your life into an act of continuous creation. But the most curious thing is that this creation didn't arise from grand moments. It happened in seemingly banal details. There was an ordinary night, for example, When you were lying there unable to sleep, trying to understand why certain words spoken by someone close to you had triggered so much pain. As you stared at the silent ceiling, a question arose without warning. Why does this still affect me? It was a simple, almost naive question, but full of power. It was the kind of question your family would never have allowed themselves to ask. And it was there, in that silent dawn, that you realized something fundamental. The reaction wasn't just yours. It was an echo of something older, something that came from those stories hidden in the deep layers of memory. Jung insisted that spontaneous questions are signs that the unconscious is ready to be seen, and perhaps it was there that you took your first real step towards freedom. From that moment on, small coincidences began to appear so improbably that they seemed like signs. Like that afternoon when, while walking distractedly down a street you had never visited, you found a tree so twisted that it seemed to have weathered centuries of merciless winds. There was a silent force in the way it grew, bent but alive, firm, resilient. You stood before it for long minutes, feeling that that tree was saying something about you. And it was. Jung reminded us that symbols are not inventions, but spontaneous manifestations of the psyche. And perhaps that tree was the clearest symbol of your journey. Something wounded, something bent, but never broken. The image remained etched in your mind, as if it were a secret chapter of your own story. It was also during this period that something improbable happened in a seemingly normal conversation. Someone told you, without any intention of provoking deep reflection, that you seemed to see the world with eyes that tired too soon. The phrase echoed within you, not as criticism, but as recognition. For the first time, someone noticed the reality of your journey. And at the same time, this phrase opened space for an unexpected revelation. You realized that, contrary to what you thought, you weren't just carrying a difficult past. You were transforming that past into lucidity. And this lucidity began to dissolve resentments, not as an obligatory act of forgiveness, but as a natural consequence of understanding. Jung said that the shadow loses power when it is understood, and perhaps that is what began to happen. The shadow of your family finally finding form, name, origin. But here comes a necessary pause. Have you noticed that this understanding is changing the way you see your own story? While others see your family as villains, you begin to see them as broken human beings, repeating the only pattern they knew. This doesn't lessen the pain, but it changes your perspective. You begin to understand that the actions that hurt you weren't personal attacks, but inevitable results of lives that never had a chance to awaken. And when this understanding sets in, something extraordinary happens. The emotional weight begins to lose its rigidity. It doesn't disappear immediately, but it transforms. Jung said that it's not the pain that causes suffering, but the way we interpret it. And now your interpretation changes, slowly, organically, like light entering a room that has been closed for decades. It is at this point that even more curious events begin to emerge. Perhaps you found an old letter stored in a forgotten cupboard, written by a family member who never expressed affection in spoken words. The letter said little, perhaps only a veiled apology or a timid acknowledgement of mistakes that were never admitted. And on that yellowed paper, in that trembling handwriting, you saw something you never imagined: fragility. Jung said that the unconscious always leaves traces, and perhaps that letter was the final trace, showing that even the hardest carry gaps where pain escapes. There are also stories that reach you through unlikely paths: a conversation overheard by chance, a comment from a distant relative, an unexpected outburst at a family gathering. Fragments that, when pieced together, begin to compose a much more complex picture than you knew. You discover perhaps that the person who hurt you the most carried fears they never named, traumas that no one addressed, silences that no one noticed. And this new information, however disconcerting, begins to rewrite your internal narrative. Not to justify, but to understand, and this understanding is a form of liberation. But here's another question. Have you realized that by understanding your family, you are the one who finally breaks free from the chains that bound you to them? As this process deepens, something even more extraordinary happens within you. The feeling of being different, which previously carried weight, begins to take on a new meaning. You realize that you didn't choose to be the lucid one in the family. Life molded you into it. Jung would say that the soul chooses the path it is capable of enduring, and perhaps that choice happened long before you were born. And now, with increasing clarity, you understand that your journey was never about defeating your family, but about breaking a destiny that had been repeating itself for generations. This realization generates an unexpected impact. Old anger becomes small waves that break before reaching the shore. Not because you want to be generous, but because you finally see that the story was never personal. And in this revelation, something opens up inside you. It's as if your consciousness gains a larger, broader space where your life can finally breathe. Jung said that awakening is ceasing to react and beginning to choose, and that's what's starting to happen now. But one last inevitable twist is in order. Have you noticed that the more you understand your origins, the more you feel that something new is about to emerge from within you? And it is precisely this something new, this intact core that has never been touched by family history, that will begin to reveal its form in the next part, where the narrative will finally cross the border between understanding and profound transformation. There comes a moment when everything you've learned so far begins to converge into such intense clarity that it seems almost dangerous. It's as if life, silently, is preparing you for a turning point that can no longer be postponed. Carl Jung said that full awareness is not born from comfort, but from honest confrontation with what we fear to see. And now, at this very moment, you are approaching that confrontation. Not because you desire great revelations, but because something within you knows that you can no longer continue carrying stories that no longer belong to your present. The weight begins to shift, and this shift announces that a profound change is about to happen. The tensions, previously diffuse, become clear when you realize that understanding your family doesn't mean getting closer to them. There's a clear difference between lucidity and vulnerability. You can see every wound, every pattern, every ancestral repetition, and still say serenely, "I'm not going back to that." It's an act of silent, yet firm courage that many never manage to achieve. Jung stated that discerning is not judging, it's seeing with precision. And it's this precision that now settles within you, allowing you to recognize that compassion doesn't require coexistence, that understanding doesn't require exposure, and that peace doesn't require closeness to those who never knew how to care. It's an awakening that arrives without fanfare, but transforms everything it touches. This realization, however, brings with it an unexpected tension. Because at the same time that you distance yourself from those who hurt you, something inside you expands almost explosively. A new sense of freedom emerges, accompanied by a strange feeling of danger. After all, when you abandon the old role that everyone expected you to play, what remains? Who do you become when you leave behind the version of yourself built to survive? This question settles in like a small internal earthquake, shaking recent certainties and opening space for a new revelation. You finally have room to exist without carrying wounds that are not yours. But expansion comes with another kind of tension. Do you remember recent situations where you needed to set firm boundaries? Perhaps a call you decided not to answer, a message you didn't reply to, an invitation you refused because you knew what would happen if you said yes. In each gesture, something profound manifested itself, your capacity to protect yourself. This movement surprised you because, for years, you believed that protecting yourself was a kind of cruelty, as if distancing yourself was synonymous with moral abandonment. But now you realize that protecting yourself is honoring your own existence. Jung would say that this is the beginning of psychic autonomy, the point at which the individual ceases to submit to inherited destiny and begins to write their own story. It is at this exact point that a turning point begins to grow, because as you distance yourself from what hurt you, you realize that something new is trying to get closer to you. Perhaps it's a person who treats you gently, perhaps an unexpected project, perhaps a feeling you believed you were no longer capable of feeling. And with this emergence, fear is also born. The fear that everything will repeat itself. The fear that the new is just the old in disguise. The fear that allowing closeness will open the door to new falls. This fear comes with force, and for a moment you feel you are about to retreat. After all, those who grew up amidst chaos learn early on that the unexpected can hurt. The breakdown happens suddenly. You wonder if you're living in the present or just reliving defenses from the past. The question pierces you like a blade, and you realize how much your body still reacts to memories that should already be distant. But it's at this point that lucidity returns with intensity. You recognize that you don't need to accept everything you feel as absolute truth. Jung said that deep emotions are not signs of destiny, they are signs of history. And now you realize that your history no longer needs to control your steps. You can feel fear and still move forward. You can remember the pain and still choose something different. The tension rises when you realize you're about to definitively break with the logic that has governed your entire life. Your family always confused love with possession, closeness with control, care with invasion. And you for a long time internalized this logic as if it were universal law. But now, facing the approaching reality, you realize something essential. The love you desire doesn't demand suffering. The love you desire doesn't ask for impossible sacrifices. The love you desire doesn't diminish you to fit the needs of another. This realization almost disorients you because it's too new, too big, too free. But it's precisely there that the narrative gains momentum. Jung explained that true transformation occurs when the individual stops reacting to the past and begins to respond to the future. And you are exactly on that threshold. The past continues to whisper old warnings, but the future is calling with a voice you've never heard before. The tension between the two worlds creates an internal noise that almost bursts from within, but it is this noise that indicates you are alive in a different way. For the first time, you are not just trying to avoid pain, you are trying to reach something real, something you have never experienced, but that you always knew existed somewhere within you. It is at this point that a final reflection emerges with unexpected force. Perhaps your entire life has been a preparation for the moment when you would finally be able to choose love without destroying yourself. And this possibility frightens you because it seems too big, but it also attracts you, as if it were an ancient calling that you are now finally able to answer. You realize that you are not just closing a cycle, you are opening a portal that will demand everything from you, but that may also give you back everything you have lost. And now, when the air feels thicker and something inside you begins to vibrate as if it's about to break, you understand that the next part won't just be a conclusion. It will be the point of revelation, the moment when your journey ceases to be reconstruction and becomes creation. The moment when what has always been hidden at your core finally emerges. And the inevitable and brilliant question that arises is this: are you prepared to discover who you can become when you no longer need to protect yourself from the world? There comes a moment when everything you've lived through ceases to be mere memory and becomes understanding. This moment doesn't arrive with fireworks, nor with ready-made answers, nor with that artificial feeling of absolute victory. It arrives like a deep breath after years of holding it. It's simple, silent, and yet powerful enough to change the course of an entire life. Carl Jung said that true transformation doesn't happen in the noise of grand decisions, but in the intimate instant when we recognize who we are without fear. And now, looking at everything you've been through, you find yourself exactly at that point, facing yourself, without illusions, without masks, without the need to please a past that no longer exists. What you discovered along this journey wasn't just resilience, it was direction. You discovered that you no longer need to repeat old stories, that you no longer need to carry wounds that aren't yours, that you no longer need to explain yourself to people who never wanted to listen. The toxicity that surrounded you didn't determine your destiny, it only pushed you to look inward sooner. Jung stated that the unconscious speaks when external life becomes unbearable, and perhaps that's exactly what happened. You were thrown inward because the outside world offered no space to flourish. And ironically, it was this impulse that revealed your strongest core. But now comes the most delicate part: what to do with this awakening. Knowing that you've broken a cycle isn't enough. You need to decide which path to take from here on out, because awareness by itself doesn't change life. What changes are the actions you take based on it, and that requires courage, It requires presence. It requires patience. This is where spiritual evolution transforms into concrete practice, into daily choices, into gestures that reaffirm what you've discovered about yourself. The clarity you've achieved needs to translate into action, otherwise it's lost. Jung said that what doesn't become conscious returns as destiny, and you know you no longer want to live at the mercy of the past. And that's why the next step is simple, yet crucial. You need to choose your own life, every day. You need to choose relationships that nurture you, conversations that uplift you, environments that respect your sensitivity. You need to choose boundaries that protect your energy and paths that reflect your worth. None of this is selfishness, it's alignment. Just as a plant naturally turns towards the light, you too need to orient yourself towards what allows you to grow. This doesn't mean abandoning those you love, but it does mean abandoning the role that hurt you. It means existing as a conscious being, not as a conditioned one. And interestingly, when you start living this way, the world around you reacts. People who previously expected your submission are surprised by your firmness. Situations that used to repeat themselves disappear because you no longer fall for them. Emotions that seemed uncontrollable begin to lose their power. You realize that life doesn't change by magic. It changes because you have changed. And this change spreads to everything it touches. Jung said that individual healing always alters the collective field, because when someone awakens, they awaken a little in everyone. And that is exactly what you represent now. A turning point in your own story, and in the story of those who came before. This is where a profound revelation manifests itself. Your transformation doesn't just benefit you. It reaches the generations that came before you, who carried pains they never knew how to resolve. It reaches future generations, who will be born free from the burdens you carried alone. You become the breaking point, the luminous crack in the dark fabric of old repetitions. It doesn't matter if your family never recognizes it. It doesn't matter if no one thanks you. The recognition lies in the very act of breaking the cycle, in the fact that, by transforming your story, you transform the destiny of everyone around you, even if they never understand how. But perhaps the most extraordinary part of this journey lies precisely in what it has awakened in you. A sense of love that is neither romantic, nor idealized, nor dependent. It is a silent, firm love born from clarity. You have learned to love without losing yourself, to care without being consumed, to give without sacrificing yourself. You have learned that true love does not ask you to diminish yourself to fit into another person's world. And above all, you have learned that love that hurts is not love. It is a repetition of wounds. The love that heals does not imprison, it expands. And it was this love that you finally discovered, not in the external world, but within yourself. Now, as we reach the end of this journey, one last truth emerges. What you have found in your search is not an adornment for quiet moments, but a tool for life. It is something you can carry with you in any situation, in any challenge, in any relationship. And by carrying this new awareness, you become someone capable of guiding others. Not with superiority, not with prepared speeches, but with presence. Jung said that the light we find within ourselves inevitably illuminates those who walk beside us. And you have become exactly that kind of light. Discreet, profound, transformative. So here's a clear, simple, and practical way to apply everything you've discovered. First, observe. Observe your emotions, your impulses, your patterns. Observe without judging yourself. Observation is the first step to freedom. Then, choose. Consciously choose what you want to keep and what you want to let go of. Choose your connections, your paths, your boundaries. Next, act. Act according to what you've discovered. Small daily gestures build a whole life. And finally, stand firm. Stand firm in your truth even when the world tries to push you back into your old role. Stand firm because you already know who you are, because you've already seen your own light, because you've already come too far to turn back. And now, knowing all this, knowing what you've been through, what you've overcome, and what you've discovered, I leave you with a sincere, direct, and necessary request. If this content resonated with you, please like the video, leave a comment, even anonymously if you prefer, and subscribe to the channel. Your interaction helps keep this work alive, helps others find similar paths, and strengthens the community of people who, like you, are awakening. You've come this far because you were strong enough to awaken. Now continue. The path is yours. The next step is yours too.